Hello, and welcome to our third episode of Franklin Forward FAQ, a video series answering questions from Franklin County residents about COVID-19 and how your family can safely navigate these unprecedented times. I'm Dr. Linda Thomas-Worthy, your host. Each episode, we will hear from local leaders providing answers to your questions based on guidelines and recommendations from reliable sources. Joining me today is Dr. Michael Colli, Chief Medical Director and Director of Pediatrics at Keystone Health.
Hi, Dr. Thomas-Worthy. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to focus on one question which has caused a lot of confusion and misinformation about COVID-19. Dr. Colli, what are the differences between COVID and the common flu, and why are we treating COVID differently?
That's an excellent question, and I'm glad you asked. I hear that question quite often from my patients. And I think it's important to say that COVID-19 and the flu have some very important similarities, but also some very distinct differences. And I think it's important for our audience to understand both the similarities and the differences so they can make informed decisions about COVID-19. First, I'll mention the similarities. They're both viral illnesses. So what does that mean? That antibiotics that we typically prescribe for bacterial infections will not work for either COVID-19 or the flu because they're both viruses and antibiotics don't work on viruses. COVID-19 is actually from a family of viruses called the coronaviruses, which have been around for years and years and years. There are 7 active strains of coronaviruses that affect humans that we know about, 4 of which are relatively benign. They cause cold symptoms or upper respiratory infection symptoms and are generally pretty mild. But there are 3 strains around now. One is SARS, another is called MERS, and the third one is our current pandemic causing strain, COVID-19. And aside from causing mild cold symptoms, these 3 strains can cause very severe respiratory and other organ system disease. The flu, on the other hand, is also a virus, but it comes from the influenza family of viruses that typically cause the seasonal flu. So they're both viruses, just come from different families. Secondly, both of these illnesses are transmitted via respiratory droplets or secretions. So if someone has either of these viruses and they cough or they sneeze, or they're talking or even breathing, then sometimes that virus can be transmitted to other people. Third, for most people, and this is important, for most people, both of these, both COVID-19 and influenza, are generally self-limited illnesses that do not require hospitalizations or cause death. Now, what I said was for most people. Both COVID-19 and influenza can cause more severe illness, and both of them can be fatal. But for most people, they tend to cause self-limited illnesses. Next, both can be prevented or can have the spread dramatically mitigated through some of the simple measures like physical distancing, universal masking, and avoiding large crowds. So what we know in the Southern Hemisphere, which is right now in their flu season, is that the same measures that we have put in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19 have also been reducing the spread of influenza. So they're actually having a fairly mild influenza season right now. And lastly, both can cause similar symptoms in the person who contracts it. They can cause fever, cough, shortness of breath, sore throat, and runny nose. So for many people, when they contract it, it's difficult to differentiate the flu from COVID-19. That is essentially where the similarities, however, end. There are multiple differences that I think are worthwhile mentioning. The first and very important difference is that influenza has had and has an approved immunization available, which helps to prevent people from getting it in the first place. And in addition, there is an approved antiviral treatment, oseltamivir or Tamiflu, which has been around for many, many years and is known to be quite effective in reducing the severity of people who get influenza. However, COVID-19 has no approved immunization available. Now, recently, just within the past week, 2 of the immunizations under development entered stage 3 trials. This is a very important milestone and hopefully means that we will have a vaccine available in the next several months. But as of right now, there is no vaccine available right now for COVID-19 or any of the coronaviruses for that matter. In addition, only recently has there been an approved antiviral treatment for COVID-19. That's remdesivir. And the jury is still sort of out on how effective remdesivir really is. And it's only available in an IV formulation right now. So it doesn't help people who are not hospitalized. Secondly, influenza is known to change its genetic makeup seasonally, meaning that a new vaccine must be produced every year in order to keep up with the changes that are occurring in the influenza genome. On the other hand, COVID-19's genetic makeup appears to be remarkably stable. So the vaccine formulation will not have to change. Once we have a vaccine that's proven to be effective and safe, then that vaccine should be the one that kind of gets us out of this pandemic, hopefully for the long haul. Next, another important difference is that COVID-19 causes multi-system organ disease. It's not just a respiratory illness. It's been implicated in some clotting disorders like strokes in people who get it. It causes neurologic dysfunction or disease. It causes cardiovascular disease like heart attacks. And it can cause kidney disease. Some people have actually, who have contracted COVID-19 have actually had to go on dialysis. So the flu tends to be more of a straightforward respiratory illness. COVID-19, for reasons which we still don't know, affects people in many different ways. Next, COVID-19 is much more deadly than influenza. In fact, the case fatality rate, that's the number of people who contract the disease who die from it, it appears to be 10 times higher than that of influenza, meaning that it's 10 times more deadly or lethal. In addition, COVID-19 is also more contagious. Its reproductive number or its ability to infect people appears to be 2 to 3 times higher than that of the flu. So you see what I'm getting at here. It's more deadly, it's more contagious. It causes a different number of symptoms in people who get it, and there's no vaccine or long-standing treatment available. So there's some very important differences I think we need to point out. Just a couple other minor differences that I think people need to hear. Number one is that COVID-19 seems to affect our older generations a little bit more severely than it does our younger generations. Early on, when it was hitting our nursing homes, the case fatality rate was very, very high. Many people who contracted it passed away. Now that the demographic of people that appears to be getting it is younger, it doesn't seem to be quite as lethal. And in fact, in some instances, for our very young population, like under the age of 10, for instance, it's quite possible that influenza might actually be more dangerous to that population. And then lastly, I think it's worth mentioning that the pre-existing conditions that put people at high risk are a little bit different for COVID-19 than they are for influenza. Specifically, COVID-19 appears to affect people with conditions like hypertension, obesity, and diabetes, whereas influenza seems to be to cause worse outcomes for people with underlying respiratory illnesses like asthma and COPD.
Thank you, Dr. Colli, for that information. I've heard a lot of people say that COVID is just like the flu, but actually it's nothing like the flu. It's important that we continue to be vigilant and informed about this virus. Before we wrap up, is there any final message you would like to leave our viewers with regarding health and safety for our community?
Yes, thank you. And I hopefully today was able to provide information on how flu and COVID-19 are similar in some ways, but there are some very important differences. They're not the same virus. COVID-19 is more contagious, more lethal for most of those who contract it, and is without an effective vaccine right now to prevent it. That makes it a completely different and much more dangerous entity, and it cannot and should not be taken lightly.
Thank you, Dr. Colli, for joining me today and answering these important questions from the community. This video series is brought to you by Franklin Forward, a group of local stakeholders committed to turning the COVID-19 pandemic into an opportunity to reimagine Franklin County. To learn more and watch other episodes, visit franklinforward.org. If you have questions about how to safely navigate the ongoing crisis that you would like answered in future episodes, please use the survey link provided with this video. Until next time, remember, safety doesn't happen to you. You have to do your part. Thank you.